reading from the book of Matthew, chapter 7, verses 15 through 29. Watch out for false prophets. They come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ferocious wolves. By their fruit you will recognize them. Do people pick grapes from thorn bushes or figs from thistles? Likewise, every good tree bears good fruit, but a bad tree bears bad fruit. A good tree cannot bear bad fruit, and a bad tree cannot bear good fruit. Every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. Thus, by their fruit, you will recognize them. Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only the one who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. Many will say to me on that day, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name, and in your name drive out demons, and in your name perform many miracles? Then I will tell them plainly, I never knew you. Away from me, you evildoers. Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house, yet it did not fall, because it had its foundation on the rock. But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who built his house on sand. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell with a great crash. When Jesus had finished saying these things, the crowds were amazed at his teaching, because he taught as one who had authority, and not as their teachers of the law. This is God's word.
Good morning. It's great to be with you all here on this morning. We've been going through a series on the Sermon on the Mount since the beginning of September, and we've been looking at, this is one of the most famous and admired sermons, not only from Jesus, but probably in the history of the world. So it's been fun looking through this, and we've been looking at particularly through the lens of how Jesus shows us a countercultural way to live. There's a lot of things that we take for granted in our culture today, and Jesus continually, throughout this sermon, he's pointing them out. He's saying over and over again, he's saying things like, you've heard that it was said, you've heard it in culture, everyone takes these things for granted, but I say to you. So Jesus, he's challenging, he's showing us a different way to live, a different story to live by, rather than the current cultural narratives that are so reigning. And as we look at various things throughout these past few weeks, we've looked at identity, we've looked at morality, right and wrong, we've looked at how things can be made right in the world, we've looked at can we have hope for the future, and as we round out the sermon today and the Sermon on the Mount, this entire series, we're going to look at the issue of truth. What is truth? And can we have certainty about what is true and what is real and what the world is like? And this issue of truth is an important one today because a lot of people, they ask the question, does anyone have the truth? Is it possible for any one person or any one group to have capital T truth, not just a truth that's applicable and helpful for them, but a truth that actually applies to all people of all backgrounds, all cultures, all places? Is there such a thing as that kind of truth? Or is truth just a personal thing for each and every person? And as Jesus comes on the scene and as he kind of addresses this issue, we come, in a culture like ours, we come bracing ourselves. It feels intolerant for any person, whether it's Jesus or any other person or any group, to say, we have the truth. We in the Christian church, we have the truth, because we've seen throughout history and possibly even in different seasons of our own lives how a claim to truth can feel oppressive and can be used to exert power over other people. And yet, it's important for us to look at this. So we're going to look at three things from this passage. We're going to see first the claim of truth, our resistance to truth, and finally, the freedom of truth. So the claim of truth, our resistance to truth, and the freedom of truth. All right. So first, let's look at the claim of truth. So our cultural orthodoxy, the reigning idea today, like I said, is that nobody has the truth. Nobody has truth that applies to every single person, every single culture, every single group, all times, all places. No, truth is relative. Truth is a personal thing. Like, you have your truth, I have mine. You live your way, I'll live my way. Don't tell anyone else how to live their life. Then don't tell me how to live my life. And here comes Jesus with the sermon, and as he's rounding up the Sermon on the Mount, he is coming with a real strong claim to truth. You see, Jesus, he's talking about there's two roads, there's two kinds of trees, there's two kinds of followers of Jesus, there's two kinds of builders of houses, and Jesus is pressing home. It is so important to make sure that you are the right kind of disciple, that you are the right kind of builder, that you're the right kind of tree. You need to discern between true and false. And as Jesus was giving his teaching, we read in the last couple of verses that the crowds, they were amazed at his teaching. They weren't just like, oh, that's a nice bit of advice for me to consider. Let me take that home. Let me just mull that over a little bit. No, they were astonished. They were like, no one taught like Jesus. He taught with such authority, not like their scribes, not like their teachers of the law who read all the books and got all the degrees, but Jesus came not citing all their authorities. He came saying, I say to you, I speak with an authority. And Jesus came with this kind of claim to truth. And so, this is not easy for us to receive in our culture today because we don't like the idea that, someone is coming with their claim to truth over me. We prefer every single one of us, we can decide our own truth. We can decide how we should live our lives. And yet, Jesus is making this claim. And especially in a culture like ours, we say things like, all roads lead to the same destination. All religions, all philosophies, all views of the world and reality and on life, they're all, even though they have differences in detail, they're all in essence pretty much the same. They're all leading to the same goal. It's all leading to enlightenment or nirvana or a higher realm of being or whatever it is. All leading to heaven or the same goal, even though it may take different forms. All roads lead to the same destination. And Jesus comes, and we didn't read this, but in the couple verses right before the passage that Tanya read for us, Jesus says, no, all roads don't lead to the same destination. Actually, there's one road that leads to the right destination, and there's only one other road that leads to the wrong destination. And this feels offensive. This feels intolerant. There are so many different beliefs out there. There are so many different people. There's so many different backgrounds and cultures and where people come from. How can Jesus come saying this kind of thing? And then Jesus follows that up in verse 15. He says, beware of false prophets. He just assumes that there's such a thing as a true prophet who speaks the truth, and there are false prophets who speak falsehood, and they're not telling the truth. So Jesus just assumes, and he comes with this sense of authority, with this claim to truth. And even though many of us, we may find this offensive with our modern 21st century ears, actually, at the same time, it's important for us to recognize that it's not only Jesus who's making a claim to truth, but every single one of us and every single culture is making its own claim to truth. What do I mean? You see, whether we realize it or not, none of us are neutral. There's no such thing as a neutral view of reality. Every single one of us has a particular take and a particular view of the way things are. You see, to say something like all roads lead to the same destination, that itself is a view of truth. It's basically a way of saying my view of reality, that all truth is relative, and no one has a truth, is superior to your view of reality, which is to say there is such a thing as truth. You see, it's to say, I'm the one who's able to kind of see the whole picture and say, none of the other religions, none of the other philosophies have the big picture, but I see the big picture that everything's relative. And it doesn't really matter, ultimately, what you believe. It's all the same. See, that itself is a particular take on reality. And so people who make that claim are actually doing the things that they're telling other people not to do. They are making a claim to truth, whether they realize it or not, whether we realize it or not. You see, we see this even in our culture today, where the reigning idea is that truth is relative, everyone's view, you just got to respect their view, their truth is theirs, my truth is mine. And yet, we see it so much in our public conversations in the public square, where even in the past couple weeks, with all the events that have been going on in the Middle East, around the world. If you've been following any of what's been happening in universities and on the campuses and different donor groups and all this kind of back and forth, and we obviously clearly don't believe that all views are relative and it doesn't matter what you believe. Like, everyone strongly believes that their view actually matters and everyone else needs to see it that way. That's what we're actually doing. Every one of us has a particular view of reality. Patrick Deneen, a few years ago, he wrote an influential book, Why Liberalism Failed. It actually got a lot of press across the political spectrum, left, right, all the way in between. And basically, his thesis was that our liberal enlightenment project of the past few hundred years has utterly failed. You see, a few hundred years ago, we saw that, there were different religions, different views of reality, and it was leading to a lot of wars, a lot of conflict, a lot of bloodshed. And so why don't we all just step back and not impose one view of reality on society, on other people, but let's just create this neutral view of reality where no one's view is favored over another, but we'll just set the ground rules where reason is the neutral playing field, it's the neutral ground, and whichever view of reality is more reasonable, has a stronger basis for argument and for believing in it, then that view is going to win. That was basically the premise of the liberal enlightenment project. And when Patrick Deneen wrote this book, I think it was published 2018, there was a collective sense all across our culture that that project has utterly failed. It has not led to a shared view of reality. No, it's led every single person, every single group to kind of entrench themselves in their own view of reality. And the only thing we can do, we can't point to any higher reality or higher values to which all of us need to agree to. But it's actually led to a lot of shouting, a lot of arguments, a lot of conflict, because every single one of us is coming already to the conversation with a particular view of reality. And yet we can't persuade one another because we don't share all those assumptions. And so that's what Deneen was saying. And Adrian Vermeule, he is a professor of law at Harvard. He wrote an article in response as he was reflecting on some of Deneen's claims, and this is what he said. There is no escape from having some substantive vision or other of the common good, no way not to have an ideology. Basically, he's saying none of us are neutral. That's impossible. Like, every single one of us, every single community, every single culture, we come to the table with a particular view of reality already. It's impossible not to have an ideology, not to have a particular vision of what life is supposed to be like, of what human beings are supposed to be like. What are society? What are the higher values which we're to respect and share together? These things are impossible. Whether we realize it or not, every single one of us has a particular claim to reality, a particular claim to truth. But not only that, most of our claims to truth are assumed rather than proven. Peter Berger, he was one of the pioneers in the sociology of knowledge. Basically, this is a field that studies how does our social context inform and influence the things we come to believe. And one example of that is like in a world where our technology is so advanced like today, it makes it more believable to believe that we create our own identity because so much of our life is lived online. It's not limited to the constraints of our flesh and blood and what we look like and what we're actually like in the real flesh and blood world. But so in a certain kind of society, certain things are more plausible than others. Certain things are more believable than others. And Peter Berger, he coined this term plausibility structures, where there are certain structures in each society that make some beliefs more plausible, more believable than others. And he said the most powerful plausibility structure is basically when a society comes to believe everybody knows that. Like, have you ever been in a room and everybody just assumes a particular point of view, and if you have a slightly different point of view, like if you even try to voice it, everyone's like, are you serious right now? Like, you actually believe that? Like, doesn't every enlightened intellectual person living in the 21st century, doesn't everyone believe this? Like, do you actually not believe this? And Peter Berger says that is the most powerful plausibility structures. And so much of what we actually believe and take for granted in our society today is not because we've examined our philosophical foundations and we've studied it and we've reasoned and all this. No, it's basically every enlightened 21st century Western person believes these things, don't you? And this is actually how many of us, we come to the things that we believe. Every single worldview rests on certain assumptions that are taken for granted. They're assumed rather than proven. And Jesus comes onto the scene, and he says, addressing our culture where we believe, of course, truth is relative. Jesus says, no, I'm coming with a certain assertion, a certain authority, speaking that there is a certain view of truth that I come with. He's making a claim to truth, challenging our cultures and each of our individual, personal claims on truth. But not only that, not only do each of us come with a particular claim of truth, but we also have an inbuilt resistance to truth. What do I mean here? There are some truths, there are some things that may be true that may make a difference in our lives or not. We can kind of take it or leave it. Some scientific studies have said, processed food is not that healthy for you. You can choose to adjust your life to that or not. I choose not to, right? I'm going to continue to eat processed food, at least for now. We'll see in a few years. But for now, that may be true. There's a lot of things out there that, may make a difference in our lives or not. But that's not how Jesus comes bringing his truth. Right? He comes with a certain authority. The crowds could sense the authority with which he speaks. And Jesus says, the truth claims that I'm making, they will make an imposition on your life. That I am the Lord God of the universe, and you need to adjust your life to what I say and to what I teach. See, and I totally feel, even as I'm saying these words, that these are not popular things to say in our culture. Whoever Jesus' PR strategist was not obviously in tune with focus groups and what culture's like today. It's like, Jesus, you shouldn't be coming out and saying all that. And Jesus is like, no, he can't help because he claims to be the Son of God in the flesh. He's the one who created reality. He created the world. And he comes bringing a certain claim of truth. And he's addressing and confronting our resistance. You see, truth for Jesus, the way he presents it, cannot just stay in the realm of our minds, in the intellectual. No, it will break into the realm of our wills and the way that we live our lives. We see this in verse 21, where Jesus says, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter into the kingdom of heaven, but only the one who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. See, what's he saying here? He's saying, there are some people who think that they actually believe the truth about who Jesus is and what he's come to do, but they haven't actually fully embraced the truth in their hearts on a deeper level where it starts to make an impact on their will, on their decisions, on their behavior, on the way they live their lives. See, it's possible to believe the truth in your mind. In another place in the New Testament, James says, even the demons believe the right things about Jesus, and they shudder. And obviously, they're not submitting to Jesus. See, Jesus is saying here, there's one particular mark, a distinguishing mark of an authentic, true follower of Jesus, and that is obeying the will of God the Father and of Jesus. See, here's what the distinguishing mark of a follower of Jesus is not. Jesus says, first, it's not believing the right things. It's not having the right doctrines, the right creeds that we need to recite. Because the person he illustrates, he says, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter into the kingdom of heaven. See, that word Lord, it was the word that often was used to refer to God the Father in the Old Testament. And so this person, whoever's coming to Jesus, they have the right beliefs. They're like, oh, Jesus, you're Lord, you're God, you are the authority. Yeah, I know, I believe the right things. And Jesus is like, yeah, just because you believe the right things doesn't mean you've embraced the truth in your heart. See, it's not only our beliefs, but it's also how strongly we feel about Jesus. I know we're a Presbyterian church. And so, feelings may play a certain role in this kind of setting, but some of us, we are very emotionally expressive, not only in our personalities, but in the way we relate to God and relate to Jesus. I actually I like to get quite emotionally expressive in my relationship with God, and so sometimes we're singing worship here, and I love our worship team, and I love the way we sing, and sometimes like my hand will just begin to go up because I'm feeling some strong feelings. I'm like, oh, Jesus, God, you're so good, and my hands will start to go up, and I've had comments from people like, oh, Paul, your devotion to God must be so good. Like, you're such a good Christian because your hands go up in worship. And I'm just like, oh, thank you. Yeah, I'm just kidding, right? No, Jesus is like, no, that doesn't mean anything. Because this person is saying, Lord, Lord. See, when you repeat that address, that form of address, Lord, Lord, it's a way of expressing your devotion. When Jesus says, Martha, Martha, when God says, Samuel, Samuel, Abraham, Abraham, there's a tenderness, there's an emotion that's being expressed. And yet, this person who comes saying, Lord, Lord, and Jesus is like, you may have the emotional expressiveness, you may have strong feelings, you may believe the right things, but that is not the distinguishing mark of an authentic follower of Jesus. Not only that, it's not just our right beliefs, it's not just strong feelings, but it's also religious activity. See, this person comes saying, Lord, didn't we prophesy in your name? We casted out demons in your name. We did so many miracles in your name. I mean, these are like powerful things that this person is doing. And Jesus' response is, depart from me. I never knew you. Like, those are some solemn words that Jesus is saying here. Jesus is basically saying, you may believe all the right things. You may have your theology all correct. You may have strong, intense emotional experiences. Your life may be filled with religious activity. You may come to church on time and sing all the songs and be involved in a group and all this stuff in your own life, and yet none of these is a distinguishing mark. You can do all these things on the surface and yet not be transformed deep in the core of your heart and your being. Jesus is saying the distinguishing mark of an authentic follower of Jesus is that your will has started to submit to Jesus. You start to surrender in your will to God. You see, there's something deeper than the surface. A lot of these images that Jesus is giving us here, you can't really tell from the surface. There's two trees. Both of them actually have fruit. It's not like one tree has good fruit and the other tree has no fruit. No, they actually have fruit. The two houses, they both look the same from the outside. You can't tell a house's foundation just by looking at it. You got to kind of dig deeper. It's deeper than the surface. You see, there may be a lot of similarities on the surface, and yet Jesus is pointing to something deeper that we need to discern in our hearts and in our lives. This deeper transformation and change in the fundamental disposition of our hearts, where we relinquish and surrender our will and start to conform our wills to the will of God and to the will of Jesus. You see, if you go and read the stories of the women and men all throughout the Bible, you see that they have started to realize that God doesn't just come into their lives just to give just a little bit of good advice. No, He's come as Lord. And they need to respect and respond to what He says. If you go back and read all the great stories of the men and women of God throughout church history, over and over again, you'll see that they sensed that this power was coming into their lives and was dealing with their hearts and dealing with them personally. They had this sense that it wasn't just good advice, take it or leave it. No, it was an authority asserting itself over their lives and over their hearts. When Jesus broke into my life some 20 years ago when I was in college, I sensed this authority in His presence. I sensed this authority in His word. As I started to consider who this God was, I was like, what is going on? And I remember, my life before Jesus, I lived a very different kind of life. And so nobody would have mistaken me as like, oh, Paul's a good person. Like, nobody in the world thought that about me. And so my lifestyle was so different. And one of the areas that I started to sense was, when I was in college, I realize I'm about to admit this to the whole world on YouTube and to all of you here. But one of the things I did in college was I'm having trouble saying it, but I cheated in school and on my exams and in my academics. Okay, I said it. So basically, I remember as God was starting to break into my life, I was taking this exam for this class, and I was about to pull out my cheat sheet. And then all of a sudden, I was like about to reach for it, and then I just started to feel something in my heart. I just started to feel this piercing, like I've never experienced before. It was a sense of an authority kind of pressing upon my heart, like this is not my way. This is not how my followers live. And I was just like, what is going on? Like, I've never felt these things before. So I was trying to pull that cheat sheet out, and like my heart I just could not do it. And so I put it away, and I totally failed that exam, and I did not do well in that class, and actually I had to reorient my entire academic life because the way I was going about it was not the way that Jesus wanted for me. And that took a while. But it was a sense of the authority of Jesus breaking into my life, confronting my will, my desire to live my way according to my rules, my preferences. And it's like, Paul, follow me. I am the Lord. And it was like, oh man, I got to respond to this. I got to adjust my will. I got to adjust the way that I live my life. See, over and over again, if you read the stories of the women and men of God throughout history who really encountered the God of the Bible, the Jesus of the Bible, you see this happening in their lives. You see this kind of wrestling. Have you experienced God breaking into your life like this? Dealing with you personally, putting his finger on the different areas of your life that are not surrendered to his will, and speaking to you and saying, this is not my way. This is the better way. Follow me. See, the authentic, distinguishing mark of a follower of Jesus is the one who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. It doesn't mean you're perfect. Doesn't mean you don't still make mistakes. Doesn't mean you don't have any flaws and weaknesses. We still have so many of those, even I myself. And yet, one area at a time, little by little, you start to experience Jesus confronting you, the Holy Spirit confronting us and calling us to lay down our wills and lay down our lives. It doesn't mean God accepts us because of our obedience. That's not the basis of our acceptance. We're accepted by grace alone through what Jesus has done in our place. And yet, the mark that we have truly come to believe, not only in our minds, but embrace in our hearts, the truth of the gospel is that it starts to make a difference in our lives. That's what a tree is like. The fruit starts to change when the life of the tree starts to change. And you see, this is the point that Jesus is making about our resistance to truth. Not only is every single one of us and every single culture making a particular claim of truth, but when Jesus presses his claim of truth, we all come with this inbuilt resistance to his truth. And so the question is, none of us can avoid a particular take on truth. Every single one of us, we come to the table with that. And yet, is there a truth that we feel like we don't need to resist, but a truth that we can submit to? A truth that doesn't oppress us and restrict our lives, but actually releases us and sets us free. So this is what we're talking about, the freedom of truth. How do you get a truth that actually fulfills our deepest hopes and longings, not only for us as individuals in our personal lives, but in our families, in our communities, and as a society? Is there a truth that can release us into the life that we all know we were meant to live? And you see, this is the kind of truth that Jesus has come to bring. When Jesus says there are two roads, he says, my road leads to life. It leads to life. It leads to flourishing. It leads to blessing. You will find fulfillment in the whole fullness of your being if you submit to me. He says, this tree bears good fruit. Healthy fruit that's attractive and beautiful on the outside, and when you take a bite, it's refreshing, it's nutritious, it's sweet. It actually edifies and blesses and encourages other people who take a taste of it. Jesus says, if you follow my truth, then your life will be like a house built on the rock. And when the storms of life come, and troubles definitely come, even if you believe in Jesus, troubles are still going to come. And yet your life is going to be so sturdy, so solid, you're going to be able to face whatever hardship comes at you. When you get the news of that medical exam, when you get that phone call, when you get that disappointment, that setback in your life, the roots of your faith are so deep that you're able to stand and face whatever life throws at you. See, this is the kind of truth that Jesus has come to bring into our lives. And yet, at the same time, our self-assertion and self-will goes so deep, especially in a culture like ours, which tells every single one of us every single day, don't let anyone tell you how to live your life. Don't let your family, don't let your society, don't let any religion, any philosophy. No, you determine how to live your life for yourself. And the only way we'll begin to release and relinquish control of our lives, that trust in ourselves that only I can know how to make my life go well. The only way we'll begin to relinquish that control is if we see Jesus surrendering his will for us. You see, as Jesus was facing the prospect of his death and being crucified on a cross, he prayed 3 times in the Garden of Gethsemane. He said, Father, if there's any other way, please let this cup pass. Yet not my will, but yours be done. He saw how hard it was. He didn't want to go that way. And yet he also saw his love for us. He saw you and me. And he laid down his will. And he went to the cross. He laid down his life. He withheld nothing back because of his love for us. You see, so oftentimes in our own lives, we hold back our lives because we don't want to trust other people, especially if we've been oppressed, especially if we've experienced abuse of power from other people in our lives. And it's understandable that we don't want to relinquish control. Why should I trust anybody else to tell me how to run my life? I'm not trusting it. No, I'm only trusting myself. And you see, Jesus says, I am the one person that you can trust because I held nothing back. I gave it all. I gave my life. I gave up my glory. I gave up my majesty. I became a human being. I went to that cross because of my love for you. There's nothing I will withhold for you out of my love for you. And you see, when you begin to see how much Jesus actually loves you, when you begin to see how much he laid down in order to love us, to the degree you see that, you will begin to see, I can trust Jesus with my life. I can surrender my will. I can start to see and experience that his way is better than mine. That his call to forgiveness is better than holding on to my resentments. That giving is better than hoarding all my resources and assets for myself. That laying down my rights and sacrificing my life to serve others is better than having them lay down their lives to serve me. That this is all what Jesus has done for me. And as I follow in his steps, I will experience the blessing, the beauty, the goodness, the joy of obeying and surrendering to his will. You see, the path that Jesus has marked out for us is not just a path of surrendering. No, it's a path to becoming the people that we were designed and meant to be in the fullness of God's call for us. And you see, as you learn to surrender your will, even though it's so hard, and it's so hard at times, and yet as you learn and as you let go and release control of your life in one area at a time, you see that God is starting to break into your life and making you new from the inside out. That he's making you a more loving person, a more gracious person, a more person who's patient with other people's failings and their weaknesses, a person who's kinder, a person who's humbler, a person who's able to endure more of the disappointments and the hardships in life. He's making you more and more into the kind of person that you were meant to be, into the kind of person that Jesus was. See, our truest and deepest experiences of life is found in surrendering our will to Jesus. Jesus came and he said, I am the truth. You know, there was a preacher in London in the last century, and his name was Dick Lucas, and Tim Keller, he often quoted him. And Dick Lucas, he tells a story one time of how a person came to him, and this person was not a Christian, not a believer, had been listening to Dick Lucas' teaching and was kind of considering these things. And he came to Dick and he said, Dick, if you can just give me a watertight argument for Christianity, then I'll believe. Then I'll give up control of my life. If you can just answer every doubt and give me a watertight argument. And Dick's response was, I can't give you a watertight argument. I can give you a lot of arguments, but none of them are watertight. They all have some way that you can kind of poke a hole in it, and some way that you can kind of find a way out. And he said, I can't give you a watertight argument, but what I can give you is a watertight person. See, Jesus came and he said, I am the truth. He didn't just say, I'm pointing to the truth. He said, I am the truth. You see, anyone who's ever looked at Jesus' life, if you look at the beauty, the matchless beauty and glory of Jesus' life, if you look at the way he spoke, the way he treated people, the way he loved on other people, the way he lived his entire life, no one ever lived a life like Jesus. There is no beauty, there is no glory. This is not possible for a human being to live this way unless you are God. Like Jesus says, I am the truth. If you look at me, if you see my life, you will see that I am the one who makes sense of reality. I am the only one who can make sense of your life and all the confusion and all the contradictions that we live with in this world. They're only resolved in him. There's no person who's ever lived like Jesus. He gave it all up out of love for you and me to let us in. And he comes knocking at our door. And he says, do you see that I am the truth? Will you let me in to your life? Because when you do, and if you do, then you will start to experience the flourishing and the fullness, all that I have promised to give to you. So let's consider those things. All right, would you pray with me? Our Father, these are weighty things that we've considered today. Lord, it's not easy, God. I know many of us were coming with our own personal life journeys and experiences. It's not easy to give up the control of our lives. But would you help us see by your Spirit just how much you love us, just how much you laid down everything, gave up everything to bless us, to lead us into the life that you've called us to. And would you help us by your Spirit to surrender more and more, whether it's for the first time or whether it's in new, different areas of our lives, so that we might experience the life that you've called us to. We pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen.